The courtroom was silent, but the tension in the air could have cracked glass. Everyone expected an open and shut case. A young man accused of grand theft auto, another face in the long list of guilty pleas. But what no one expected was that the boy standing at the defense table wasn't just any defendant. He was about to outsmart the entire courtroom. Judge Raymond Cole leaned back in his chair, eyes cold and calculating. Before him stood 19-year-old Ethan Miles, calm, composed, and surprisingly unshaken. His hands were in his pockets, his head slightly tilted up as if daring the world to underestimate him. The spectators whispered among themselves. Reporters scratched in their notebooks, ready to record another routine sentencing. Even the bailiff smirked, convinced this would be quick. But they were all wrong. Judge Cole sighed and flipped through the file in front of him. "Ethan Miles," he said, his tone dripping with cynicism, "charged with stealing a 2023 Lexus and resisting arrest. Tell me, son, do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" Ethan didn't respond. He simply stared straight ahead, unreadable. The judge let out a chuckle. "You think silence will help you? This isn't some high school debate club. You're facing real charges here." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor, Adam Perry, joined in with a smug grin. But Ethan didn't laugh. His eyes were sharp, focused, almost calculating. What no one knew was that Ethan wasn't just any teenager. He had spent years studying the law, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. While his friends played basketball or scrolled through social media, Ethan read court transcripts and legal journals. His mother, a longtime paralegal, often joked that he could pass the bar exam before finishing college. And now, standing accused in a courtroom meant to break him, Ethan was about to prove her right. Judge Cole tapped his gavel once. "Let's proceed. I have better things to do this afternoon." The gallery chuckled again, but Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile, because the judge had already made his first mistake, treating this case like a joke. The prosecutor rose confidently. "Your Honor," Adam began, straightening his tie, "the state will demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant was apprehended inside a stolen vehicle, a 2023 Lexus registered to one Mr. Peter Lang. The defendant attempted to flee the scene before being detained by law enforcement. His fingerprints were recovered from the steering wheel, and the evidence is overwhelming." He paused for effect, turning slightly toward the jury. "The defendant's behavior, the physical evidence, and the officer's direct testimony will make it clear. There's no misunderstanding here. This young man is guilty." The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. It sounded convincing, airtight, perfect for conviction. But Ethan knew better. He had spent years observing how easily the truth could be twisted by polished words. Judge Cole leaned forward. "Seems pretty straightforward to me. Let's hear the defense." He turned toward the young public defender sitting beside Ethan, nervous, inexperienced, and completely unprepared. She opened her mouth to speak, but Ethan gently touched her arm. "I'll handle this," he said softly. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked startled. "You'll what?" Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room erupted in whispers. The bailiff frowned. The prosecutor scoffed. The judge looked like he was suppressing laughter. "You're serious?" Cole asked. "I am," Ethan replied. "Then by all means, Mr. Miles," the judge said with a mocking grin. "Entertain us." Everyone in that courtroom thought the same thing. This boy was about to destroy his own case. But Ethan wasn't improvising. He had been preparing for this moment since he was 12 years old. He took one step forward, his tone clear and deliberate. "Your Honor, before we begin, I'd like to ask the prosecution one question." Adam crossed his arms, amused. "Go ahead." "You stated that Officer Kevin Ruiz personally witnessed me behind the wheel before my arrest. Correct?" "That's right." "And that detail is included in his official report?" "It is," Ethan nodded slowly. "Then I move to dismiss that testimony." The judge raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" Ethan removed his hands from his pockets and gestured slightly toward the prosecution's table. "Because Officer Ruiz couldn't have witnessed me in that car. He wasn't even on duty at the time the chase began." The words hit like a stone in still water. The prosecutor blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Ethan stood tall. "I request the GPS records from Officer Ruiz's patrol vehicle. They'll show exactly where he was when the pursuit started." The spectators whispered louder now. Judge Cole's smirk faded just a little. Adam's confidence wavered. If the officer's report is accurate, Ethan continued, then his location data will confirm it. But if it doesn't, we'll see the truth. The pause that followed was long and uncomfortable. The judge turned toward the prosecutor. Any objections to verifying that, Mr. Perry? Adam hesitated. Too long. Long enough for everyone in the room to notice. No objections, he finally said. Ethan gave a small, knowing smile. The game had begun, and for the first time the courtroom was paying attention. The tension in the courtroom shifted so sharply it was almost visible. The gallery leaned in. The judge sat up a little straighter. Even the bailiff stopped pretending to look bored. Something was changing and everyone could feel it. Ethan didn't waste a second. While we wait for those GPS logs to come in, he said, let's discuss the fingerprint evidence. Adam straightened his jacket, recovering his confidence. Gladly. The defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle. That alone proves he was driving it. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Does it really? He stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying through every corner of the room. Imagine you walk into a store, try on a pair of sunglasses, then put them back. Hours later, someone steals those same glasses. Your fingerprints are there. Does that make you a thief? The room went quiet. A few jurors exchanged glances. One even frowned, thinking it over. Ethan continued, his tone steady, logical. That car, the Lexus, was parked outside a grocery store hours before it went missing. I was there that evening with 2 friends. We passed the car, and yes, I touched it. The door was unlocked. I opened it out of curiosity, saw nothing, and closed it. Then we walked away. He turned slightly, facing the jury again. A fingerprint only proves contact. It doesn't prove intent. It doesn't prove theft. It proves I touched a surface, not that I stole what it was attached to. Judge Cole studied him, his pen frozen halfway through a note. Ethan took a slow breath. And speaking of evidence, Your Honor, I'd like to ask the prosecution a question. Was the forensic analyst who examined those prints called to testify today? The judge's eyes flicked to Adam, who hesitated. No, Your Honor, the specialist was not deemed necessary. So, Ethan interrupted softly, you're using scientific evidence to argue guilt, but the person responsible for collecting and analyzing that evidence isn't here to explain how it was processed? A murmur rolled through the gallery. Adam bristled. The lab report speaks for itself. Ethan smiled faintly. Reports don't speak, people do. And that person isn't here, which means this court can't question whether those prints were contaminated, mislabeled, or even processed correctly. The prosecutor clenched his jaw, flipping through his papers as if searching for an escape. But there wasn't one. Judge Cole sighed and set his pen down. Mr. Perry, is there a reason the forensic specialist wasn't subpoenaed? Adam avoided his gaze. No, Your Honor. The silence that followed felt heavy. For the first time, the judge wasn't smirking. Ethan stepped forward, his voice lowering, carrying a quiet authority. Your Honor, this case began as something simple. A stolen car, a suspect, an arrest. But sometimes when things look too simple, that's when the truth is hiding in plain sight. He paused just long enough for the words to sink in. I'd like to introduce new evidence. A written statement from the owner of the stolen vehicle, Mr. Peter Lang. The prosecutor's head shot up. Objection, Your Honor, you're overruled, the judge said before he could finish. Let's hear it. Ethan unfolded a sheet of paper and began to read. The night my car was taken, I left it running while I went inside the gas station. When I came out, it was gone. I saw the person who drove it off, and it wasn't the man they arrested. The person was white, about 6 feet tall, wearing a gray hoodie. The room erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jurors turned to one another, whispering. Ethan lifted his eyes. That's a direct statement from the registered owner. Yet this information never appeared in the prosecution's file. It wasn't included in the testimony. It wasn't even mentioned. Why? He turned toward Adam. You had this statement, didn't you? Adam's face flushed. That report wasn't. Ethan cut him off. It was in the original police file. I got it through a public record request. The words landed like a thunderclap. Judge Cole leaned back slowly. Mr. Perry, is this true? The prosecutor hesitated again. It appears that portion of the statement was omitted in the state's submission. Omitted, Ethan repeated. Convenient word for something that changes everything. The courtroom fell completely still. No one laughed now. No one smirked. Ethan looked at the jury again, his tone steady but passionate. The real thief was never caught. The officers found me walking down the street nearby and they made an assumption, one that fits a pattern we've all seen before. A young man who looks guilty before anyone checks the facts. He took a step back, his voice lowering. This case isn't about evidence. It's about shortcuts. It's about bias. It's about people who wanted a quick answer more than a right one. The judge didn't interrupt. The prosecutor didn't move. The entire courtroom listened. Ethan finished quietly. I'm not here to make anyone look foolish. I'm here because the truth still matters. And if this system forgets that, it's not just my freedom at stake, it's everyone's. He stepped away from the table and waited. The judge leaned forward, his tone softer now. Mr. Perry, does the prosecution have anything further? Adam shook his head, defeated. No, Your Honor. Judge Cole looked down for a long moment, then exhaled. Case dismissed. A wave of sound broke through the silence. Gasps, cheers, murmurs of disbelief. Reporters leapt to their feet. Ethan didn't move. He simply closed his file, calm as ever. The noise around him didn't matter. He had done what he came to do. As he turned toward the exit, the judge's voice stopped him. Mr. Miles, Ethan paused. You ever think about law school? A small smile touched his lips. Every day. He walked out into the light of the courthouse steps. The noise followed him. Reporters shouting, cameras flashing, questions flying. But he didn't answer any of them. He was already thinking about what came next. Because one case might be over, but the fight for truth had just begun. Outside the courthouse, the sun was blinding. Reporters swarmed the steps like bees, shouting questions that collided in the air. Ethan, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? How does it feel to beat the prosecution? Are you planning to sue the city? Ethan didn't answer any of them. He pulled his hood up, eyes fixed on the pavement ahead. The victory wasn't about headlines or attention. It was about something deeper, a quiet promise he had made to himself years ago. At the bottom of the stairs, his mother was waiting. Her arms were folded, her face unreadable. But when their eyes met, the tension broke. You scared me half to death, she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. Sorry, Mom, I had to do it. She studied him for a long moment. You didn't just fight for yourself in there. You fought for everyone who never got the chance, he nodded. That's the point. For a while, they stood there saying nothing. Around them, reporters buzzed and cameras flashed. But it all felt far away. Across the street, Judge Cole stepped out of the courthouse, his usual arrogance replaced by something quieter. Regret, maybe. Or respect. Their eyes met briefly, just long enough for the judge to give a slight nod before walking away. It wasn't approval. It was acknowledgement. That small moment meant more than the dismissal itself. It meant Ethan had been seen, not as a criminal, but as someone who forced the truth to surface. As the crowd thinned, Ethan and his mother began walking toward the parking lot. The afternoon air smelled of asphalt and car exhaust, but to him it felt like freedom. Mom, he said suddenly, do you remember when I was 13 and told you I wanted to be a lawyer? She laughed softly. You were sitting at the kitchen table arguing with the TV. I remember, he said, smiling. That's when I realized people don't always lose because they're guilty. Sometimes they lose because they don't know how to fight. His mother nodded slowly. Then keep fighting, son. Just make sure you're fighting for the right reasons. I will, he promised. The ride home was quiet, but inside Ethan's mind everything was moving. The adrenaline from the courtroom hadn't faded. The victory felt hollow not because he lost something, but because of what it revealed. He thought about all the other cases just like his. People arrested without real evidence. People who couldn't afford good lawyers. People who never got to speak. That thought hit harder than the trial itself. He turned to his mother. You think people like Officer Ruiz ever face consequences? She shook her head slowly. Most of the time, no. The system protects its own. Then maybe it's time someone protects the ones who don't have that system on their side, he said quietly. She didn't answer right away. After a moment, she reached over and squeezed his hand. Then start with that. Let this be the beginning. When they got home, the neighborhood was buzzing. News had already spread online. Teenager defends himself and wins. Strangers cheered his name from porches. A group of kids on bikes shouted, "You're famous." Ethan smiled and waved, but fame wasn't what he wanted. He walked inside, shut the door, and finally let himself breathe. The walls of their small apartment were lined with law books his mother had collected over the years. She used to study cases at the kitchen table, and he'd sit beside her asking questions. Now he opened one of those old books again. The spine cracked as he turned the pages. The scent of old paper filled the air. He read the words slowly, laws, rights, arguments, and felt something stir in him. He wasn't done. The system had gaps, places where truth slipped through unnoticed. He had seen it firsthand, and if someone like him could find a way to expose them, maybe others could too. He spent hours that night reading, taking notes, watching old trials online. Every case he studied felt like another piece of the puzzle, another reminder that justice wasn't automatic. It had to be fought for, word by word, argument by argument. By midnight, the city outside was asleep, but Ethan was wide awake. His desk was covered with notes and legal pads. On one of them, he wrote just 3 words: "Truth has power." He stared at the phrase for a long time before underlining it twice. Because that was the real victory. Not the dismissal, not the headlines, but the reminder that knowledge was the sharpest weapon in the room, and Ethan Miles was just getting started. He looked out the window at the empty streets. Somewhere, someone else was probably sitting in a cell tonight waiting for a chance to be heard. He made a silent vow. When he became a lawyer, he would find people like that, the ones nobody listened to, and give them a voice. The next time he stood in a courtroom, he wouldn't be the one defending himself. He'd be defending the truth. That night, sleep refused to come. Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every moment from the courtroom, every word, every expression, every second of silence that had changed everything. He kept seeing Judge Cole's face in that final moment before the gavel struck. The disbelief, the respect, the quiet realization that truth had won, not authority. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a reminder of what the law was supposed to be, a weapon for justice, not judgment. But as the hours passed, that pride slowly twisted into something heavier. A question he couldn't shake. How many people didn't get that same chance? How many stood where he stood and didn't have the words, the knowledge, the courage to fight back? He sat up in bed, his hands clasped together. He could still hear the echo of the crowd outside the courthouse, cheering his name, calling him a hero. But that wasn't how it felt. He hadn't won because the system worked. He had won because he'd forced it to, and that difference haunted him. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Teen prodigy outsmarts judge in courtroom drama. Young defendant defends himself and wins. They made it sound like a movie. But Ethan knew reality wasn't that cinematic. For every case like his, there were dozens where truth never even made it to the table. When he arrived at the small community college where he'd been taking classes, the world had already found out who he was. Students stopped him in the hallways. Professors congratulated him. Someone even asked for a selfie. He smiled politely, but inside, the applause felt empty. Later that afternoon, while walking past the law library, he paused. Behind the glass walls, rows of books stood like silent sentinels of knowledge and power. He thought about how much those books had given him, and how few people had the time or access to read them. That's when the idea began forming. He didn't just want to study law anymore. He wanted to change it. Make it fairer, simpler, accessible to those who couldn't afford it. That evening, he met his friend Marcus at a small diner near campus. Marcus had watched the entire trial on a live stream. "Man, you're famous now," Marcus said, shaking his head. "You walked in there like a kid and walked out like a legend." Ethan stirred his coffee. "Legends don't mean anything if the system stays broken." Marcus frowned. "You really think one guy can fix it?" Ethan looked up. "Not one guy, but maybe one idea." He explained his plan, a platform that would help people understand their rights in plain language, connect them to real legal resources, and expose patterns of unfair arrests. Something that could bridge the gap between those who knew the law and those who didn't. Marcus leaned back, impressed. "You're serious?" Ethan nodded. "If I learned anything from that courtroom, it's that power only works for you if you understand it. Most people never get that chance." The diner was quiet for a while. The clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation filled the space around them. Marcus finally said, "Then do it. Build it. You already proved the system can be beaten. Now teach others how. That night, Ethan sat at his desk again. His old notes from the trial were still there. He flipped through them, seeing not just a defense strategy but a roadmap. Every weak point in the process, every step where justice could go wrong. He started writing again. Not case notes this time, but blueprints for something new. A website. A mission. A movement. He titled the first page Project Fairground, because that's what it needed to be. An equal ground for everyone who ever had to stand before the law. Days turned into weeks. Between classes, he coded the first version of the platform himself. Late nights, long hours, fueled by determination and black coffee. His mother would peek into his room sometimes, worried but proud. "Don't burn yourself out," she warned one night. "I'm not," he said, smiling faintly. "I'm just getting started." By the end of the month, the site was live. A simple homepage with 3 words that carried the weight of his entire journey. Know your power. At first, a few friends joined, then their friends, then strangers from across the country. People who had been silenced by the system started sharing their stories. Lawyers began offering to volunteer. Journalists wrote articles. And suddenly, Ethan Miles wasn't just the kid who defended himself in court. He had become something else, a symbol of change, a spark that lit a fire across a system built to stay quiet. But with every new supporter came something darker. Attention from people who didn't want change. Anonymous messages, threats. "Stop making noise. You don't know what you're getting into." He ignored them. He had faced worse in a courtroom. Fear had already lost its power over him. Because for the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for everyone else's. And this time he wasn't standing alone. Months passed, and what started as a small project from Ethan's bedroom began to spread faster than he ever imagined. The platform grew into a movement. Local news stations ran features about it, and people from different states reached out, sharing how the website had helped them defend themselves, understand their rights, or find lawyers who actually cared. But with growth came pressure. Ethan was invited to speak at community centers, schools, even small legal seminars. Each time he stood on a stage looking at faces filled with hope, he felt both proud and terrified. Proud because he knew the impact was real. Terrified because the truth he was revealing was shaking powerful foundations. One evening, while reviewing user reports on his site, Ethan received an email that froze him in place. The subject line read, "You're making the wrong enemies." The message was short. "Stop digging into old cases. Some things are meant to stay buried." He stared at the screen for a long time. His heartbeat quickened, but he didn't delete the message. Instead, he forwarded it to Marcus with a note that simply said, "Looks like we're doing something right." Marcus called immediately. "You need to be careful, man. This isn't a school project anymore." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "That's exactly why I can't stop." A few days later, Ethan received an invitation to attend a city hearing on justice reform. At first, he thought it was a mistake. He was only 19. But the committee wanted to hear from the person behind Fairground. They wanted to know how he'd managed to build something that was forcing people to rethink the system. When he arrived at City Hall, reporters were already waiting. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks as he walked inside. But this time he wasn't nervous. This time he belonged there. The hearing began with formal statements from officials, lawyers, and community leaders. Then the chairperson turned to Ethan. "Mr. Miles," she said, "you've challenged how the legal system operates. What made you start all this?" He took a deep breath and looked around the room. "Because I lived it," he said simply. "I saw how easy it was for the truth to be buried under assumptions and paperwork. I saw how quickly a person could lose everything just because nobody listened. I built Fairground because I realized knowledge is the only real armor against injustice." The audience was silent. Cameras zoomed in. Every word felt heavier than the last. He continued, "Justice isn't supposed to be a privilege for those who can afford it. It's supposed to be a right. But rights mean nothing if people don't know how to use them." A ripple of applause started at the back of the room and spread. The chairperson nodded slowly. "Well said, Mr. Miles." After the hearing, a woman approached him. She was in her 40s, holding a worn folder to her chest. "My brother was wrongly convicted 5 years ago," she said softly. "Your website helped us reopen his case. He's coming home next month." Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. "I'm glad," he whispered. That night, he returned home to find his mother waiting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea steaming beside her. She smiled when she saw him. "You're changing things, Ethan," she said. He sat down across from her. "I'm trying, but it's hard. There's still so much wrong out there." She reached across and placed a hand on his. "Then keep going. Every small change matters. You've already done what most people only dream about. You made the system listen." He looked down at her hand, then back up. "You know, I keep thinking about that day in court. I thought I was fighting for myself, but now I realize I was fighting for everyone who never got the chance." She smiled faintly. "Then keep fighting for them. That's your calling." Weeks later, Ethan stood once again outside the courthouse, the same one where it had all begun. The same steps, the same cold stone walls, but this time he wasn't wearing a hoodie. He was wearing a suit, a modest one, second-hand but pressed and clean. He was there for his first internship at a legal aid office. As he stood at the base of those stairs, he looked up and let the weight of everything sink in. Every long night, every fear, every small victory that led him back here. Inside those walls, the system had once tried to define him, but now he was walking back in on his own terms. He wasn't the defendant anymore. He was the defender. When he entered the building, a clerk looked up and smiled. "Mr. Miles, right? They're expecting you." He nodded and walked down the hall. The echoes of his footsteps felt symbolic, steady, certain, and somewhere deep inside he knew this was just the beginning. The world was full of silent stories waiting to be heard, people waiting to be believed. He pushed open the office door, took a breath, and smiled. Because this time, he wasn't standing alone in a courtroom trying to prove his innocence. He was standing for something much greater, the truth itself. And he knew one thing for sure. As long as truth existed, so would he.